Greetings, people of the interwebs, Jake here. So, a few days ago I did a video on why I think Gimli has the best arc out of any of the characters in the out of the Fellowship in the Lord of the Rings, which I really enjoyed, because all things Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, Middle-earth, that is my jam. It's basically my religion, and also really enjoyed doing that video. So, I'm going to try another Lord of the Rings kind of lore-esque video, and see how it does. So, as you can tell by the title of this video, the question is, who in the Fellowship knew that Gandalf was a Maiar? So, first off, I should probably explain what a Maiar is to those who aren't as familiar with, like, Tolkien's work, before I, even delve into which members of the Fellowship would have known what Gandalf was. So basically, a Maiar is an angelic being, more or less, and a servant of the Valar. So the Valar are the gods of Arda, or the world that Middle-earth resides on, and all the different races and creatures. And so, although not all are actually servants of the Valar, like there are some, like the Balrogs and Sauron, are also Maiar, but basically they're angelic beings, some of which fell to evil, like the Balrogs, and same thing with Sauron. So that's essentially what a Maiar is in a nutshell. So, Gandalf, along with the other Istari, or the wizards, so Saruman, Radagast the Brown, and then the two blue wizards, Palondo and Alatar, are also Maiar. And the whole reason that they were sent to Middle-earth is basically to help guide the free people of Middle-earth against Sauron and his influence. I believe they arrived in 1000... the year 1000 of Third Age. Could be wrong on that date, but all that to say, that's the whole point of the wizards. Basically, there are three characters we know for sure actually did know who and what Gandalf and the other wizards were. That being Círdan the Shipwright, one of the oldest elf in Middle-earth, and one of the wisest, and also one of the wielders of the three elvish rings of power, Narya, the Ring of Fire. Because the dude, he basically ran the Grey Havens, so basically like one of the only ports that went to Valinor for the elves. And obviously Gandalf, the other wizards, arrived from the west. There's no landmass west of Middle-earth except for Valinor, and only, elves can access it, and of course, in this case, the Maiar. So, I would say when they arrived, he probably immediately knew that they were somehow involved with Valinor, but also just due to his foresight, he probably could have easily, foresaw their coming. Because that's actually why he gave Gandalf the Ring of Power, Narya, because he foresaw some of the trials and tribulations that Gandalf would go through. It was like, bro, you're going to need this. So, slight digression there. So, outside of Círdan, there's also Galadriel, who is also one of the oldest and wisest of the elves left in Middle-earth. And probably sort of similarly, either through foresight or just probably educated guess, probably could have figured that out if Gandalf didn't outright tell her, Círdan and Elrond, who's the third person, who would have known who and what Gandalf was and his true purpose. Kind of for the same reason, because Elrond, Galadriel, and Círdan are like three of the wisest elves in all of Middle-earth, so Tolkien even stated as much that those three knew who he was. So there's actually a fourth person, before I delve into the Fellowship, and that's Glorfindel, my second favorite elf, because he, I guess, slight digression into Glorfindel, so back in the First Age, slew a Balrog, died in the process, was re-embodied in Valinor, as the elves are, but was such a badass that the Valar were like, shit, hey, you want to go back to Middle-earth? Here's a new body, and off you go. So basically, he probably would have known, or, I forget if Tolkien wrote specifically if he did know, but more than likely he would have known. So four characters for sure knew who Gandalf was, along with the other wizards, and what their purpose was. So, now, with a little bit of that context out of the way, let's dive on to the members of the Fellowship. So I'm going to start off with the four hobbits, because honestly I don't think they really had any inclination of what Gandalf was other than a wizard. Because here's the thing with the wizards. So, obviously a lot of people outside of the elves knew that the wizards had been around for quite some time. But they kind of just assumed that they were some type of elf, and so anytime they used magic, or the fact that they, barely aged, really wasn't that odd for anybody. And even Gandalf's name, both in world and actually in Old Norse means Wandelf. So basically, that's why no one really batted an eye with Gandalf and the other wizards living for a really long time, and because they just assumed they were some type of elf. Um, so hobbits probably thought the same thing. They were just like, all right, he's a kooky old elf dude, and he likes fireworks and just likes hanging out smoking, pipeweed. And didn't really think too much of it other than him just having magical powers. And really the only time, or at least that I can recall from the books, that any one of the hobbits had some kind of notion that Gandalf was more than that was in The Return of the King when Pippin first sees Denethor. Because he kind of notes how just regal and fair and how basically kingly he looks. But then when he kind of looks back over to Gandalf, he kind of notices, he's like, oh, Gandalf has almost this kind of other kind of unquantifiable quality about him. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but that's more or less his realization that he's kind of like, huh, maybe there's a little bit more to Gandalf than him just being, the kooky old dude who visited the Shire every now and then. But that's about it. And so I really don't think the hobbits, maybe until the very end, like, as Gandalf, as sailing west with Frodo, and, Elrond, Galadriel, maybe then it was probably okay for him to kind of be like, hey guys, so I'm actually an angel. Because by that point his mission was done and, it didn't matter. Because that was the whole thing too with the wizards is as powerful as they were, they couldn't flaunt their power. Because the whole point was to, subtly guide the people of Middle Earth rather than, showcase their power, because then people would just flock to them for, like, hey, why don't you be our leader and stuff. So, Hobbit, I don't think knew. Next, I'm going to move over to Boromir. And I don't think he knew either. He might have, again, maybe suspected that there was, like, Gandalf was maybe more than just a regular elf. But I don't think he really had any kind of suspicions. And honestly, I don't think he really... The thought probably didn't cross his mind all that much. Honestly, I'd say Faramir might have been a bit more... maybe not suspicious is the right word, but maybe a little bit more interested in maybe pondered, like, that Gandalf maybe was something else. But honestly, I don't think it really crossed Boromir's mind. I just don't think it was something he would really think a whole lot about. So I don't think Boromir knew either. So we move on to Three Hunters. So I think Gimli probably initially didn't think much of Gandalf, other than, again, probably the same thing. It's like, all right, here's this old wizard dude, does some magic, he's well-connected, knows a lot of people, everyone seems to like him. But that was probably about it until, I think, when him, Aragorn, and Legolas meet him in Fangorn Forest, once he's come back as Gandalf the White. That's probably when the red flags start to go off, and he's kind of like, hey, I thought you were dead. And so that's maybe when he's... And again, it's kind of hard to say for sure, just based on, like, his interactions and stuff like that, at least that I recall in the books. But I'd say he maybe started to suspect something. Now, whether he knew that Gandalf was a Maiar or not, that I don't know. But I think that probably would have been a clear moment for anyone to kind of be like, okay, yeah, there's something else going on here. He isn't just old wizard dude. He isn't, clearly he's not just an elf. There's something else to this guy. So I think that probably would have been Gimli's moment in realization to kind of, again, realize that, yeah, Gandalf, there's something else to him. But again, I don't know if he would have been able to put two and two together that Gandalf was a Maiar or not. So next, I'm going to go to Legolas. So Legolas, I think, was probably the most likely of the Fellowship that probably could have pieced things together. Because one, he's an elf. Two, I would say he probably had heard tales of Valinor from, like, some of the older elves, even though I don't believe his father, Thranduil, grew up in Valinor, but he probably still would have heard tales of, like, what Valinor was like, and it was the land of, the Valar, the Maiar, and all that stuff. And, again, even, I'd say more than likely, once he saw Gandalf come back as Gandalf the White, that's probably when, if he did have any suspicions beforehand, that probably confirmed it. But even if he didn't have any suspicions and just assumed Gandalf was, you know, like all the others kind of perceived him as, I think that definitely would have been the moment where he probably would have put the pieces together and realized it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this dude is definitely a Maiar. Because even when elves, with the exception of Glorfindel, even when they die, they're re-embodied and then they just live out the rest of their immortal lives in Valinor, the Undying Lands. They don't get sent back to Middle-earth, again, unless you're Glorfindel. So he probably would have suspected, like, okay, yeah, he's back, he looks different, he's got an upgrade, he's probably a Maiar, and also Gandalf mentioned that, you know, the whole reason he was sent back is to complete his task, because he's the only one of the wizards that stayed faithful to his task. So, I would say Legolas for sure probably would have pieced things together. Again, if he had suspicions beforehand, I would say that definitely would have been confirmed once he saw him as Gandalf the White in Fangorn Forest. And sort of similar, I think Aragorn probably would have also pieced things together, just because, one, he grew up in Rivendell, was raised by Elrond, one of the wisest of the elves, so I'd say there's a decent chance that he probably would have even seen Gandalf show up to Rivendell a few times during his youth. And again, probably it might have been something too similar to Legolas, where he might have had like some suspicions that there was something else to Gandalf. Now, whether he thought he was a Maiar or not, or just kind of assumed that like he was, again, there was just something a little extra about him. Hard to say, but similar to Legolas, I would say once Gandalf came back as Gandalf the White, that's when he probably could have easily pieced things together and be like, yes, Gandalf is for sure a Maiar, because clearly, I mean, just look at him. He's all white and shiny, and he's got a cool new staff now. So, and again, no one really comes back from the dead, and you know gets sent back to Middle Earth unless you're Glorfindel. So yeah, Aragorn probably could have figured that out as well. Without, you know, I figured that would be just kind of like simple like math at that point, and to piece that puzzle together. Now, as for other characters in Middle Earth, whether it be, you know, major, minor, supporting characters, I would say probably not. Again, even like some of the elves, like Thranduil, for example, probably didn't think anything else of Gandalf other than he was a wizard. So I'd say really outside of the four for sure people we know who knew who Gandalf was and what he was, I'd say a safe bet would be Legolas and Aragorn. Then anyone else, if anything, then maybe would have had some kind of suspicions that Gandalf was something other than, you know, an old dude or some kind of elf. But I highly doubt anybody would have suspected that he was a Maiar. So those are my very kind of rambly thoughts on who I think in the Fellowship probably would have could have figured out, you know, that Gandalf was a Maiar, and the ones that I don't think probably would have thought much of it, which is probably most of the Fellowship. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy this, I might make this a more regular type of video that I do, like lore videos or just, you know, videos on all things Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, Middle-earth, because I can go on ad nauseum. So, do usual YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and until next time everyone, cheers.